remember the first time I met Elon Musk. It was 2014, and I had just been hired to join his security team. Back then, he was exactly what you'd expect. A brilliant mind, a tireless visionary, but also oddly human. He had his quirks. A nervous laugh that escaped at inappropriate moments, and the habit of drumming his fingers on a table when impatient. We spent years together. I was more than a bodyguard. I was a shadow. I watched closely as he built his empire, tested rockets, and talked about colonizing Mars. But everything changed in 2018. It was on a stifling night in Texas, during an engine test for SpaceX. Elon was unusually quiet, his eyes fixed on the horizon as engine smoke choked the air. When he finally broke the silence, he said something I'll never forget. "Do you think humanity deserves a second chance, David?" "I think everyone does, sir," I replied, trying to mask my surprise. He smiled, but something was off about that smile. It wasn't the one I knew. It was calculated, as if rehearsed. I didn't think much of it at the time, but the following weeks only deepened my suspicion. The details were subtle. He stopped drumming his fingers. The nervous laugh disappeared. His interactions began to feel mechanical, almost robotic. And then, something even more unsettling. The scar. Elon had always had a small scar at the base of his neck, the result of a childhood accident. But suddenly it was gone. I casually asked him about it one evening, and he simply laughed, as if my concern was absurd. But his eyes weren't laughing. That was when I started noticing the signs. And then came the accident. In late 2018, the news blew up with the story Elon Musk had been in a near-fatal car crash on a deserted California highway. But he appeared in front of cameras just 2 days later, looking flawless, without a scratch, explaining that the initial reports had been exaggerated. I was there. I saw the car. It wasn't an accident. It was a trap. That was when I got a call from an old FBI contact of mine. "David, you need to get out. Now, whatever came out of that car, it's not what you think." I ignored the warning. I stayed. It was my job. But that night, I saw something that froze me to my core. I was patrolling the grounds of Musk's mansion when I heard a strange noise coming from the underground lab, a place only Musk and a handful of engineers had access to. I decided to investigate. As I approached, I saw a silhouette through the cracks of the door. It was him, or at least it seemed to be, but his skin, it was different, greenish-gray, gleaming under the cold light. I saw something in his face shift, like a mask slipping for a moment. I backed away, trying to stay calm, but the sound of the door opening froze me in place. "David? What are you doing here?" The voice was his, but something was wrong. It was too deep, as if echoing from the depths of a cavern. "Just checking the perimeter, sir." He watched me for a moment that felt far too long before nodding and closing the door. After that night, I knew the Elon Musk we once knew was dead. The imposter, the Elon running Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink, was something humanity was never meant to encounter. And here I am now, 2 years after abandoning my post, recording this message for whoever will listen. I have proof, photos, audio, but I know that as soon as I hit send, my life is over. The world needs to know. The man who dreams of taking humanity to the stars might not even be human. And he's not taking us upward. He's leading us to slaughter. It's funny how the human mind tries to rationalize the irrational. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Working with someone as intense as Musk could be exhausting, and maybe the pressure was getting to me. But the more I observed, the less the pieces fit. After that car accident, he seemed new. Not in a figurative sense, but literally. The energy that had once defined him, that nerdy excitement, the almost childlike sparkle in his eyes when talking about Mars, was gone. It was as if someone had placed a replica in his place but didn't know how to mimic his human nuances. I remember a meeting weeks later when these changes became even clearer. It was one of those private conferences, just Musk and a few big names in tech and politics. My job was to stand still in the room, invisible but alert. But Musk wasn't invisible in that room. He dominated the space in a way I had never seen before. Progress must be absolute, not an illusion of advancement, he said, his voice sounding almost metallic. Everyone in the room nodded, seemingly hypnotized. But I couldn't focus on what he was saying. It was the way he moved his hands, as if every gesture was meticulously calculated to convey authority. It was different, mechanical, and then there were his eyes. I can't explain it, but in that moment they seemed too deep, as if they were both empty and full at the same time. At the end of the meeting, one of the guests, a tall, bald man in an impeccable suit, stayed behind. He and Musk exchanged hushed words I couldn't quite catch, but I managed to pick up a name that felt out of place. Xantherian, what was that? A company? Person? I mentally noted to look it up later, but before I could think more about it, Musk turned to me. David, everything all right? For the first time, I felt the weight of his presence. It wasn't a casual question. There was something inquisitive, almost predatory, in his tone. Yes, sir. Just staying vigilant, as always. He smiled, but once again that smile. Calculated. Almost mocking. That night, I started digging. It wasn't easy. Working for Musk meant having limited access to his most confidential operations, but I was good at what I did. I spent hours scouring obscure forums, conspiracy theory websites, and articles by independent journalists. That's when I found the rumors. Powerful figures throughout history, world leaders, magnates, influential artists, being replaced by something that seemed human but wasn't. Reptilians, beings described as scaly-skinned creatures with hypnotic eyes, infiltrating humanity to manipulate governments and prepare the planet for something bigger. I laughed to myself at first. Couldn't be real. That was tinfoil hat nonsense, right? But the more I read, the more the pattern repeated itself. Unexplained disappearances, sudden personality changes, accounts of strange encounters. And then I remembered the accident. What my FBI contact had said. Whatever survived that car crash. It's not what you think. My hands trembled as I read. But the most unsettling moment came when I found a shadowy website buried deep under layers of encryption. It wasn't easy to reach, but when I did, I saw something that took my breath away. A list. Names, dates, locations, powerful figures allegedly replaced. And among them, highlighted in bold, was Elon Musk, 2018, Los Angeles. I slammed my laptop shut. Couldn't be true. But deep down, I knew it was. The next morning, I decided to confront Musk. Not directly, of course, but I asked subtle questions, probing to see what he knew. Sir, I was thinking about the accident. You were lucky to come out unharmed, weren't you? He stopped what he was doing and looked at me. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Not anger, but something deeper, as if he knew exactly what I was trying to do. David, luck is a human concept. I prefer to call it efficient calculation. That answer sent chills down my spine. It wasn't something the Musk I used to know would say. That night, I made a decision. I was going to find the truth, no matter the cost. If someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd end up at Groom Lake, also known as the legendary Area 51, I would have laughed. But at that moment, everything strangely made sense. My search for answers had led me to a place where reality and absurdity intertwined, and what I saw there changed my life forever. The opportunity came unexpectedly. One of the contacts I had made during my investigations, a former military operative who insisted on being called only Carter, agreed to meet me. He said he had information that could explain what was happening, but he demanded I come to Nevada. Groom Lake, he said coldly over the phone. Don't ask how, just go. The place was everything the conspiracy theorists claimed it was. Surrounded by endless deserts, watchtowers with cameras tracking every move, and an atmosphere so oppressively heavy it felt like the air itself carried secrets. Carter managed to get me inside using a disguise. He said I was a new hire for the security sector, a flimsy excuse that, to my surprise, worked. That's where I first saw the documents on replacement protocols. It was a massive file, locked in a control room Carter accessed with a magnetic pass. The pages were filled with anatomical diagrams that weren't human. Elongated spines, eyes adapted for night vision, and skin described as composed of biosynthetic scales. There were detailed charts on surgical procedures, mechanisms for mimicking speech patterns, and even methods to replicate human memories. But what stood out most to me were the lists of names. Among them were politicians, business leaders, and scientists. And there he was again, Elon Musk. "This is what they call a silent takeover," Carter explained. "They don't need to invade. They become you." I asked what they meant, but Carter just shook his head. "You don't want to know. Not yet." That file brought me back to the exact moment the real Musk disappeared. It was January 2018, and he had a trip scheduled to an undisclosed destination. "Just business," he'd said. The itinerary indicated a flight to southern Africa, but I knew something was wrong. Musk was private, but rarely evasive. "I need you to stay here, David. I won't be gone long." I wasn't used to being left behind, but I obeyed. It was part of the job. The private jet took off at dusk, and that was the last time I saw the real Musk. When he returned, something had changed. Or rather, someone had changed. The first sign was how he ignored my greeting at the hangar, something he'd never done before. He had always been polite even under stress. But this Elon walked past me without a word, with a look that seemed to pierce my soul. I thought maybe he was tired, but then the details started piling up. The way he spoke, the absence of his scars, and the endless nights he spent locked in his lab, no sounds coming from within. It was around that time that he started talking more about global control. Before, his public speeches were about innovation and exploration. Suddenly, he was obsessed with stabilizing humanity. "Governments are flawed. We need something better." I remember a private meeting where he proposed something called the Ascension Protocol, an initiative that, according to him, would integrate governments and corporations into a single efficient system. At the time, it seemed like a crazy, futuristic idea. Now, it felt like part of something much more sinister. After my trip to Groom Lake, everything began to make sense. Elon wasn't just running his companies. He was shaping the direction of entire governments. His connections extended beyond politicians and CEOs. There were meetings with generals, top scientists, and even figures tied to secret organizations. Once, I overheard a conversation through a barely closed door. He was speaking to an unfamiliar voice in a language I couldn't identify. It wasn't human. The sound was sibilant, almost reptilian. I began piecing it all together. The replacement protocols were real, and Musk was one of the most advanced examples of this operation. But he wasn't alone. There were others, many others, occupying strategic positions of power. And the worst part was, they were just getting started. Carter warned me before I left Groom Lake. "If you keep digging, David, they'll come for you. They always know who's watching." That night, as I drove back to the motel where I was staying, I realized I was being followed. The headlights of the car behind me drew closer, but before I could react, the vehicle disappeared. Not turned, not stopped, just vanished into the darkness as if it had never been there. They knew I was getting too close. I remember the time I went into the desert. I wasn't supposed to be there. I knew it the moment I stepped out of my car and felt the hot desert wind against my face, carrying the kind of oppressive silence only the desert can offer. But something pulled me to that place, as if it were inevitable. The location was far from any tourist route, a lost point somewhere between Nevada and nowhere. I had followed Musk, or whatever he was now, there. He'd left under the cover of night, taking only a driver and no explanation. I arrived just in time to see him step out of his black SUV and walk into the emptiness of the desert. a solitary figure under an absurdly clear sky. The stars were so vivid they felt exaggerated, like a filter applied to reality. I kept a safe distance, hiding behind a rocky outcrop, watching through binoculars. Then it happened. At first, I thought it was a shooting star, a streak of light across the sky. But it didn't fall. It didn't vanish. It stopped. A triangular form slowly emerged from the horizon, black as the night itself. It wasn't an airplane, that much I was sure of. There were no engine sounds, none of the drone hums I had grown familiar with. The craft simply hovered there, defying everything I understood about gravity. I should have been focused on the ship, but my eyes drifted back to Musk. He was standing still, staring intently at the structure. Not with fear, but with something that resembled reverence. And then he spoke. Xantherian? Status? That's what I understood from reading his lips. His voice carried clearly through the desert silence. There was no one around him, no device in his hand. At first, I thought he was talking to himself. But then, the lights on the craft blinked in a pattern that seemed to respond. Was it a code? A language? I had no idea. But Musk seemed to understand. He continued, his posture relaxed, almost casual. The project is progressing. Human control remains as expected. No threats detected. The lights on the craft flashed again, this time quicker, almost as if confirming something. That's when it hit me, he wasn't just talking to it. He was part of it. My heart raced. I didn't know what I had expected to find by following Musk, but it certainly wasn't this. Not a craft straight out of a science fiction movie, and definitely not a billionaire speaking to it as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Then he turned, his eyes fixed on the horizon, as if he knew he was being watched. My body froze. Even from a distance, I had the unsettling impression that he was looking straight at me. I ducked down, holding my breath, but it was too late. He knew. Somehow he knew. I heard a low, vibrating sound, like distant thunder rumbling. The craft began to move slowly, spinning in the air before shooting straight into the sky and disappearing in seconds. There was no way anything human could move like that. When I dared to look again, Musk was already back in the SUV, heading toward the road he'd come from. I stayed there, trying to process what I had just witnessed. The idea that Musk was an imposter was already disturbing enough. But now it seemed clear that he wasn't just working with aliens. He was a key piece in their plan. But what was the plan? I remembered the Groom Lake documents and the replacement list. Musk was only one of many. If he was reporting progress to an alien ship, what were the other replacements doing? Governments, corporations, military forces, all manipulated by something far greater than I could comprehend. And perhaps most terrifying of all, it seemed they weren't hiding any of this out of fear of being discovered. No, it was something colder, more calculated. They knew no one would believe it. If Groom Lake was my entry into the nightmare, what I discovered afterward was my plunge straight into its depths. It all began with a folder Carter, my military contact, left for me at a prearranged drop-off point. It was an old, abandoned garage on the outskirts of Las Vegas, the place reeking of rust and dust. "Everything you need is here," he said before leaving quickly, as if being near me was a death sentence. Inside the folder were dozens of documents, blurry images, and some cassette tapes I could barely wait to play. But one particular sheet, marked with the title Operation Prometheus, caught my attention. The document spoke of an agreement dating back to the 1940s, when an alien race, identified only as the Silence, made contact with reptilian leaders. I read and reread the pages, feeling the blood drain from my face with every word. The Silence didn't want Earth for its natural resources, as many conspiracy theories suggested. They wanted something far more intangible: influence. To achieve that, they offered the reptilians something no other species could refuse: technology. What came in exchange was the most terrifying part: unrestricted access to human leaders. The reptilians became the link between the Silence and humanity, infiltrating positions of power and manipulating the masses to serve alien interests. And this was where Musk fit into the equation. Another document contained a detailed report on how Musk had been marked for replacement. The real Musk was described as problematic. According to the report, he had started questioning the global power structure and suspecting the reptilians' intentions. In a secret meeting with other business leaders in 2017, he had reportedly said, "If this continues, we won't have a future as a species. We need to tell the public." That statement sealed his fate. In early 2018, during the infamous trip to southern Africa, Musk tried to contact a group of independent journalists. He had managed to gather evidence, including photos and recordings, that proved the pact between the reptilians and the Silence. But he never made it to his destination. The reports described how he was intercepted, taken to a conversion center, and replaced. His body, according to the notes, was disintegrated in a process referred to as biological energy recycling. What hit me hardest was a final paragraph in the report. Replacement successful. The asset now operates under direct supervision of the Silent Council. I sat there, the paper trembling in my hands. The Musk I had known and protected was dead, and his replacement wasn't unique. The documents listed other names, each associated with dates and locations. Bill Gates, 1995, Seattle. Mark Zuckerberg, 2004, Palo Alto. Angela Merkel, 2008, Berlin. Jeff Bezos, 2010, Seattle. And many others. The pattern was clear. Figures with massive global influence, technology, economy, politics, had been marked and replaced. The most terrifying detail, however, was a note mentioning proposed replacements. President of the United States, 2024. Pope, 2026. They were just getting started. As I read the documents, a bigger picture began to form. Earth wasn't just a planet to the Silence. It was a pawn in a cosmic game of control. They didn't need invasions or wars. They needed leaders who would serve them unquestioningly. And the reptilians, in exchange for limited power over humanity, had become their accomplices. Musk, or rather the imposter now bearing his name, wasn't just a victim or a passive agent. He was one of the most sophisticated tools in this plan. With his influence, he could shape humanity's future according to alien interests, all under the guise of progress and innovation. But one line in the document left me particularly intrigued. Substitution is not permanent. The original human must be eliminated to maintain the connection. That gave me a spark of hope and fear. Musk was dead, but what about the others? If substitution wasn't permanent, could there be a way to expose the imposter? Before I could plan my next move, a message on one of the tapes caught my attention. It was a short but clear audio recording. A sibilant voice said, "Operation Prometheus is underway. Global fusion will be completed soon. Neutralize all threats." In that moment, I realized I was one of those threats. After witnessing the triangular craft, I knew I needed answers beyond the documents Carter had given me at Groom Lake. It was time to find someone who knew more, someone who had been directly involved with Musk and his operations before his death. That's how I came across the name Dr. Jonathan Avery. Avery was a brilliant scientist, renowned for his pioneering work in biotechnology and artificial intelligence. Before mysteriously disappearing in 2018, he had been one of the key minds behind several of Musk's projects. He vanished around the same time Musk was replaced. Coincidence? No way. My search for Avery began with weeks of digging. He wasn't listed in any recent records, no address, no photos, nothing. He seemed like a ghost. But after scouring obscure forums and tapping into the network of contacts I'd built over the years, I found a lead. An encrypted note left on a conspiracy forum. "If you need answers, seek the sun that never shines." The message seemed like a riddle, but after analyzing the context and cross-referencing information, I realized the sun that never shines was a reference to a specific location. Sierra Nevada. The lead made sense. The isolation of the mountains was the perfect hiding spot for someone who wanted to disappear. I stocked up my car, packed everything I could carry, and set off. Avery's cabin was tucked away among dense pines, enveloped in an almost oppressive silence. As I approached, the sound of the wind through the trees felt like it carried an invisible threat. I hesitated before knocking, and to my surprise, the door was opened by a thin man with wary eyes. "David Miller?" he asked. I hesitated before answering. "Yes, and you must be Dr. Avery." He studied me carefully before opening the door a little wider and gesturing for me to come in. "If you've come this far, you know what you're getting into." He quickly shut the door behind me, locking it with several bolts. The interior was cramped, cluttered with piles of papers, old monitors, and corkboards covered in notes and photographs. At the center of one board, a single word stood out in red letters: Prometheus. "You were close to Musk," I began, trying not to sound desperate for answers. "The real Musk," he corrected bitterly. Avery sat down and began to talk, and his words confirmed all my fears. The real Elon Musk, according to Avery, was a visionary. He believed in the power of technology to emancipate humanity, to give people control over their own lives. Neuralink, SpaceX, Tesla, all of it was part of a grander plan to break humanity's dependence on exploitative governments and corporations. But he wasn't naive. He knew there were forces that would resist, Avery said, staring into the distance. Those forces began to emerge in 2017 when close allies of Musk started proposing projects that didn't align with his vision. He investigated and discovered that these proposals originated from a group called the Consortium, a secret organization controlled by the reptilians with deep connections in every sphere of power. When Musk tried to distance himself, he was betrayed by his own allies. They handed Musk over to the reptilians and the silence, Avery explained. He was executed, and in his place they put something hybrid. Avery didn't hide the anger and guilt he carried. He had worked on several projects that were later used against Musk, without realizing it at the time. That's when Avery began talking about Operation Prometheus, the reptilian plan to dominate humanity using alien technology. He pointed to the corkboard, where complex diagrams and confidential documents were pinned with thumbtacks. The pact between the reptilians and the silence is older than we think. Decades. They traded technology for influence. But it's not just about control. It's about total replacement. Avery explained that the silence wanted to transform humanity into something easier to control, a collective, a unified hive mind. Neuralink's technology and other advancements were being adapted for that purpose. Musk tried to stop it, Avery said. He believed he could expose it to the public. But he was killed before he could act. He handed me a flash drive. "This has everything you need. Names, locations, records." I stared at the small device in my hand, feeling its weight as if it were a bomb about to go off. "This won't be enough," I murmured. "People won't believe it." Avery stepped closer, his expression grave. "They will if you give a face to the plan. And that face is the reptilian Musk. He's the one laying the groundwork for the next step." A long silence hung between us as the implications settled in my mind. "Then we need to expose him," I finally said. "We need to expose all of them," Avery replied, his gaze steely with determination. Sitting at the makeshift table in the cabin, Dr. Avery and I began to draft a plan. The flash drive he had given me contained detailed information about Operation Prometheus, but for Avery, it was just the beginning. "Humanity is already subdued," he said, his voice tinged with restrained fury. "Not physically yet, but mentally." He pointed to an old monitor where a graph pulsed in shades of green and yellow. "This is their real weapon. Not the ships, not the biotechnology. It's the manipulation of the masses." Avery began explaining how alien technology had been subtly integrated into society, often disguised as harmless advancements. Social media, artificial intelligence, surveillance systems, It was all part of a grand experiment to shape public perception. They control the flow of information. They create divisions, distractions, false hope. Every major technological advancement in the past decades has been designed to make us dependent on them. I thought back to how Musk, or rather the imposter, always promoted his ideas as steps toward a utopian future. Now, I saw how deceptive that facade truly was. And SpaceX? I asked. Neuralink? Tests, Avery replied. They need systems capable of sustaining the fusion. Neuralink will be the key to connecting people directly to the control system. SpaceX? A plan B in case they need to abandon Earth. Avery then detailed the role of the replaced Musk. He's not just a reptilian agent. He's the perfect symbol. People idolize him. He can sell any idea and make them believe it's for the greater good. The new Musk was using his influence to pave the way for the mass return of the reptilians. The grand projects he led, from space colonization to global automation, were all part of a much larger plan. They don't need to invade, David, Avery said bitterly. We're inviting them in. He showed me documents from the flash drive that detailed how reptilian leaders were being inserted into governments and corporations, all coordinated by an alien council. The next phase of the plan, called the fusion, would be the complete integration of humans with alien technology. Once the fusion begins, it'll be too late to resist. A long silence followed as we processed the information. Finally, Avery stood up and began gathering papers and equipment. We need more than proof. We need an event they can't ignore. Something that exposes the reptilian Musk to the world. I nodded. If we can unmask him, the whole plan could collapse. Avery agreed but added cautiously, they'll hunt us the moment they realize what we're trying to do. And I'm certain they're already suspicious. He handed me another set of documents. This outlines Musk's next moves. He has a meeting with global leaders in 3 weeks. That's when he's expected to announce the next major Neuralink advancement. Something called Pioneer Integration. The fusion? I asked. Avery nodded. It's the first step. We need to be there. We need to expose the truth before he has the chance to convince them. It was a suicide mission, but we knew we had no choice. This wasn't just about unmasking the imposter. It was about preventing humanity from being turned into something unrecognizable. Before I left, Avery looked at me with a serious expression. David, this won't be easy, but if we fail, it'll be the end of humanity as we know it. He was right. With the flash drive in my pocket and the heavy mission weighing on my mind, I set out to plan our next steps. Returning to Groom Lake was the kind of decision that could seal my fate. It wasn't a place you entered and left unscathed twice, especially carrying the kind of knowledge I had now. But I had no choice. I needed more than speculation and fragmented evidence. If I wanted to expose the truth, I needed irrefutable proof. After studying the documents on Avery's flash drive, I found a vague reference to a specific location within Groom Lake. What Carter had shown me before was only the tip of the iceberg. Now I knew where to look. The journey was tense. Even with alternate routes and improvised disguises, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Nevertheless, I arrived at Groom Lake's perimeter just before dawn. This time, there was no Carter to get me inside. I used what I had learned from my first visit: patrol schedules, surveillance patterns. After hours of waiting for the right moment, I slipped past the outer fences and crept toward one of the more isolated hangars. The building looked abandoned, but when I forced my way through a side entrance, I found a hidden elevator. The access interface required a code, but to my surprise, the badge from my first visit still worked. I don't know if it was luck or oversight, but I stepped in before I could overthink it. The elevator descended for several long minutes before finally opening into a corridor lit by cold, pale light. At the end of the hallway, a steel door with a small window loomed. Inside the room, I found what looked like a monitoring center. Screens lined the walls, playing video loops, while physical files were stacked on tables. What I saw on the screens made my blood run cold. On one of them, I recognized Elon Musk, the real Musk. He was sitting in a sterile room, his hands cuffed to the table. The footage appeared to be from 2018. He was speaking to someone off camera, his voice tense but defiant. "You can do whatever you want to me, but the truth will come out. People will know." A chilling silence followed before a low, sibilant voice responded. "No, Elon, they won't, because you will be replaced." The scene shifted to another recording. Musk's body lay on a gurney as unfamiliar machines scanned him. On the other side of the room, a humanoid figure, a near-perfect replica of Musk, emerged from a capsule of some kind. "Replacement complete," a robotic voice announced. The documents around the room filled in the gaps. There were detailed reports about the replacement process, including the use of alien technology to copy brain patterns and simulate human emotions. But the most disturbing papers were the lists. One outlined business leaders and politicians who had already been replaced. Another listed future targets. What shocked me most was seeing dates and locations associated with names I recognized. UN Secretary General, 2025. UK Prime Minister, 2026. Pope, 2027. Alongside the videos were documents detailing how the reptilians had already infiltrated other areas of power. There was evidence of their influence in central banks, global defense systems, and even the media. Reports described how certain international crises had been fabricated to distract the public while replacements were carried out. "They don't need a war," I muttered to myself. "They're already winning." With the flash drive Avery had given me and the new evidence I found, I knew I finally had enough to expose the truth. But getting out of Groom Lake was another matter. The alarm sounded as soon as I tried to leave the complex. Cameras that had previously ignored me now seemed to track my every move. I hid in a storage room for hours, listening to the heavy footsteps and voices of search teams. When I finally managed to escape, the sky had grown dark again. Reaching my car, my heart was still racing, but I knew I had taken a critical step. With the videos and documents, I now had evidence that couldn't be ignored. But I also knew that I was now marked. The silence of the night was broken only by the distant sound of cars on the highway. After escaping Groom Lake with the evidence in hand, I knew time was against me. I needed to find a safe place to analyze the documents and plan our next moves. I tried contacting Dr. Avery several times, but there was no response. A growing unease began to take hold in my chest. I parked at a roadside motel, one of those anonymous places where no one asks questions. As I settled in, I noticed something was off. A black van had parked across the street, its dark windows reflecting the glow of the streetlights. 3 men stepped out, dressed casually but moving with military precision. I grabbed my phone and tried calling Avery again. Voicemail. I sent an urgent message. "Where are you? I have the evidence. I'm being followed." I waited a few minutes, but no response came. I decided I needed to leave immediately. Gathering my things, I opened the door to my room and came face to face with one of the men. His eyes had a cold, inhuman glint. He smiled in an unnervingly artificial way. "Mr. Miller, we need you to come with us," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Without thinking, I slammed the door in his face and ran toward the fire exit at the end of the corridor. Behind me, I heard the door being kicked open. I bolted down the stairs, skipping steps, as my pursuers followed close behind. When I reached the parking lot, I saw the van already blocking the main exit, but my car was nearby. I sprinted toward it, but before I could reach it, another man emerged from the shadows, moving with unnatural speed. I remembered the small pocket knife I carried. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. As he lunged at me, I dodged to the side and managed to slash his arm. To my shock, instead of blood, a greenish liquid oozed from the wound. His eyes flared with rage. "You can't escape, David," he hissed, his voice now carrying a reptilian tone. Adrenaline surged through me. Taking advantage of his momentary surprise, I dashed to the car, got in, and started the engine. Flooring the gas, I drove straight into the fence separating the lot from the road. The impact was jarring, but I broke through. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror to see the van beginning to pursue me. My heart pounded uncontrollably. I needed to lose them. Taking a secondary road that wound into the hills, I hoped the rough terrain would slow them down. The twisting road demanded all my focus. The van's lights still shone behind me but seemed to be falling behind. Then my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. Avery has been compromised. Trust no one. Panic set in. If Avery had been captured, or worse, I was on my own. But who had sent the message? Before I could think further, I saw a roadblock ahead. 2 cars positioned across the road, with shadowy figures waiting. With no other choice, I swerved onto a barely visible dirt path. The car jolted violently but held steady. The van failed to make the turn and sped past on the main road. After a few miles, I found a wooded area and decided to hide the car among the trees. I turned off the lights and engine, trying to steady my breathing. The night was silent except for the distant hum of insects and the rustle of leaves. I pulled out my phone and, despite the risk, replied to the message. "Who are you? What happened to Avery?" Minutes passed without a response. I felt cornered, but I couldn't stop now. Reflecting on recent events, I realized the reptilians were becoming more aggressive. My discovery at Groom Lake had put them on high alert. Without Avery, my chances of exposing the truth were slim, but I couldn't give up. I had the evidence and knew what needed to be done. I resolved to find a secure location to release the information to as many people as possible. If something happened to me, at least the truth would be out there. Just as I was preparing to leave, my phone vibrated again. Another message. "If you want to survive, go to meeting point 3. Dawn will bring answers." The number was still unknown, but the message included GPS coordinates. I didn't have many options. After one last look around, I started the car and headed toward the location, clinging to the hope that there might still be allies in this fight against the shadows threatening to consume humanity. The meeting point was in an isolated area, surrounded by mountains and dense trees. I followed the coordinates to a clearing where there was nothing but a small metal shed. It was perfect for staying unnoticed, but the place exuded a strange, ominous energy, like a trap waiting to be sprung. I had the evidence, the Groom Lake videos, the documents detailing the real Elon Musk's replacement, and the lists of powerful figures already infiltrated. Everything was on the flash drive, ready to be uploaded online. This was the moment. I knew that once I pressed the button, I'd become the most hunted man in the world, but at least the truth would be free. Stepping out of the car, I kept a watchful eye on my surroundings and entered the shed. In the center was a table with what appeared to be a functioning laptop connected to a generator. It all seemed too convenient, but I had no other choice. The silence around me was unnerving, broken only by the generator's hum. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. "Mr. Miller, you really don't know when to quit." The voice was cold and emotionless. I turned to see a man dressed in black, but his eyes betrayed his true nature. Reptilian. Behind him, others emerged from the shadows, surrounding me. "You won't stop me," I muttered, trying to escape, but it was useless. They were faster, far faster than I could ever be. One disarmed me with a single blow, while another snatched the flash drive from my hand. "Humanity isn't ready for the truth," said the leader, holding the device. "You're just a pebble in the road." They destroyed the flash drive before my eyes. All the work, all the hope reduced to ashes in seconds. An overwhelming emptiness washed over me, but I knew I had to survive. I ran. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the sound of their footsteps behind me. I reached my car and managed to escape, but they followed. The chase was relentless, and I only got away by abandoning the vehicle and hiding in a network of nearby caves. When the commotion finally died down, I realized how defeated I was. No evidence, no allies, and no hope of exposing the plan. I became a fugitive, changing my identity and living in the shadows, always looking over my shoulder. Since that night, I've ceased to be David Miller. Now, at the end of 2024, years after that day, I see signs the world insists on ignoring. UFO sightings are becoming more frequent, especially in America. News of unexplained phenomena surfaces every week, but it's dismissed as collective hysteria, drones, or coincidences. I know the truth. It's a silent warning that the reptilians and the silence plan is entering its final stages. For too long, fear has kept me silent. But now I realize I can't stay quiet any longer. Even if no one believes me, I must leave this account as my final act of resistance. Everything you've read here is true. The man you know as Elon Musk was replaced. The reptilians control more than you can imagine, and the pact with another alien race has put humanity's future in jeopardy. They don't need an invasion. We're handing everything to them willingly. As I write these words, I know they may cost me my life. They are always watching, always waiting. But if even one person believes, perhaps there's a chance. I don't know if I'll be alive when you read this. I don't know if anything can be done. But I believe the truth is powerful. And sometimes, it can ignite a spark where all seemed lost. The truth is out there, but only those who fight will find it.